Projection and identification is a very powerful force in creating relationship and reality. Now, on the side of identification, if I identify as a square, what I do is I take all the different information that's coming in, 50% of which is not processed by the conscious mind. In other words, our senses pick up twice as much information as we actually process. So senses pick up all this information, and I pick up this information. Now, in order to facilitate my identification and induce you into my identification, what I have to do is every time that you broadcast feedback or data towards me, every time that you project or interact with me, I validate the information that fits within my self-image, and I ignore the information that does not. So let's say that I feel like a victim. Let's say that I feel horribly treated, that that I'm being used, you name it, whatever it is. Well, every time that you do something that uses me or that falls close to that narrative, I'm going to emphasize it and draw attention to it. Every time you do something that doesn't validate this box, I'm going to ignore it. Now, in this way, I can induce you over time into seeing the reality that I see, because I respond to the information that fits my reality and I reject the information that doesn't. And pretty soon, particularly in this particular framework right here, you would have to see that you're a pretty bad person, because you've done some good things out here, but I've rejected them. And you've done some crappy things in here, and I've talked about them at great length. And so it looks like you're a bad person. Now, one of the things that's interesting about the rigidity of identification is that it's always linked with a projection. Meaning, if I'm identifying as this shape here, then what I'm projecting is the corresponding shape over here. In other words, if I identify as an amazingly, as a great listener, let's say, if I identify myself as being swept away by an amazing speaker, and you're the one that's speaking, then what I'm projecting is that you are an amazing speaker. If I'm identifying as being a lonely victim, then I'm projecting that you are being a isolating abuser. In other words, there's an intersection here in the middle where you take the whole of a dynamic and in the entire dynamic it breaks down into polarity, into a masculine and feminine role. The masculine role is the actor, is the initiator, is the speaker, is the leader, and the feminine role is the follower. Now, there's a battle in many cases when there's a lack of partnering. There's a battle around this projection identification dynamic because there's a symmetry. In other words, if I want to be a listener, and I want to be a great listener, then you have to be a great speaker. But if you want to be a great listener, then I have to be a great speaker. And so there's a certain tension in any moment of time. And in both cases, the reality is much bigger than the other person realizes. The reality is much bigger. We're inside the little box, and we're checking off the parts of reality that confirm our position, our image, our projection, and we're canceling and ignoring information that rejects our position, our image. But usually it's a little bit more sophisticated, because usually, at least in many Western relationships where there's a lack of partnering and a lack of partnering and an effort to initiate or dominate, there is a phenomena where in my reality I'm a triangle and you're a corresponding triangle in the inverse. If I'm a victim, you're a perpetrator. If I'm a great listener, you're a great talker. If I'm a follower, you're the leader. And so I'm taking this field of data and I'm putting a triangle into it. And you're taking the field of data and you're putting a square into it. And as a result, there's a conflict. There's a conflict in the projection identification dynamic. There's actually two different conversations, and neither person identifies fully with the other's projection. Now, this is largely due to a silence and a collusion not to communicate and have meta-conversation. Meta-conversation is pausing the conversation to say, what do you think is going on in this conversation? And the other person saying what they think and asking the same. because when you do that, that's when it emerges that I'm seeing myself as the person who's accommodating you, but you see yourself as the person who's accommodating me. Because I'm looking at this bit of data that you've blocked out, and you're looking at this bit of data that I've blocked out. And because we're not checking up on what we're seeing, and because it's easy to forget the dynamic, it just takes a short amount of supply, and we actually forget the data that didn't show up on our radar. Now, what I want to talk about are a couple of phenomena that can take place around identification. So one is that I identify as being hurt by this that you do. And you deny the hurt by distracting and saying, no, I did this, here. And you focus on the area that's outside of the box. Now, what this does is it denies the area inside the box. And whenever you push something down, it amplifies. And so the trick is to, first of all, acknowledge everything in the box. And secondly, acknowledge the impact of everything in the box. And thirdly, if what's inside the box is out of line, inappropriate, etc., correct the data in the box. Meaning, if I stole your money, return it. If I broke your car, fix it, etc. And then deal with the information outside of the box. And if you're with someone who will only acknowledge the stuff within their box and who actively denies the larger data field, the larger reality, the 50% of things that they weren't paying attention to but that you were, well, it's one of two things can happen. You can then flip the issue and you can say, well, my box is registering that you're not acknowledging this, you're not acknowledging that, you're not acknowledging this, you're not acknowledging this, you're not acknowledging this. And so we've got a skewed data set. Now, one of the easiest ways to try and manipulate another person for more information, more energy than then they're giving back, creating a relationship ledger where there's a continual flow of energy that's one way, is to not acknowledge the other person's gifts and contributions. And this is a problem when you want the other person to stay in relationship with you. In other words, it's not going to happen for a person to stay in relationship with you if you only count the negatives and don't count the positives, because they will always be in debt. The more time they spend with you, the more they will be in debt within that framework. Well, as with any commercial or social relationship, if one person is constantly taking, and the other person is not acknowledging the gift, then it's no fun. So if you give a sales clerk $100 for an item and they ignore it, and then they want you to give another $100 for the same item, and they don't give you the item, you just go shop somewhere else and ask for your money back. The key is to understand the malleability of the data set on both sides. That within the data set, there is a pattern of victimhood, there's a pattern of abuse, there's a pattern of imbalance, there's a pattern of, there's a good deal of patterns. Now, the value of the projection and identification framework is that it brings light to certain patterns that need to be conscious, that need to come to consciousness. Because if you don't see the abuser in you, and then when someone creates a box that frames all of your abuse, if you don't see the blind spot in you and you create a box in which you don't have any blind spot, you're missing out on key parts of the data set. It doesn't give you flexibility. If you can zoom in and see I'm an abuser, I'm an abused survivor, I'm a chauvinist, I'm a fighter of chauvinism, I'm an honest person, I'm a dishonest person, I'm a seeing person, I'm a blind person. You kind of have a sense of that whole map. One of the most powerful things that it does is it creates a certain framework for empathy, but it also creates a framework for equality. You know, when you can understand that this person is doing 10% or 10 times more of what you do over here, but you have that part of you in you. It creates a framework for understanding rather than dissociation, which is helpful in relationship because you can't heal or resolve or bring a relationship back into balance if there are 100% good guys and 100% bad guys. If you've got someone that's got a good pattern over here but a bad one over here, and you've got this other person that's got a good pattern over here and a bad one over there, and you're trying to bring balance by sorting this out, and they're trying to bring balance by sorting out this, then you've got two good people that are out of whack. Now, if you're seeing a triangle, and if you're identifying as a triangle and projecting a triangle creator, and they're seeing a square and projecting a square creator, there's room for both square and triangle within the data set. And the question becomes, when does the rigidity of self-image create a barrier to connecting? And the other thing that's very valuable, because you can see how you can induce for example, if I'm really set on this box, and I say, up, you turned away, that's abuse, up, you did that, that's abuse, up, you did that, that's abuse, up, you did that, that's abuse. And meanwhile, you're giving me money and doing this and that and the other, and that's not being acknowledged. then at some point, this person is going to become agitated by the imbalance. They're going to become irritated, impatient, annoyed, hostile. They're going to feel hurt by the intensity of the one-sided projection. Now, it's not that it isn't happening, it's that it's happening in such a one-sided way. Now, pretty soon, they're going to escalate and start focusing hostility on the person that is only measuring what's bad about them and not measuring what's good. Now, one of the reasons for that is the need for impact. Every human being needs impact in order to regulate themselves and learn and grow. So if the only way that I have any impact is to do something bad, and I don't have any impact doing something good, then every time I feel insignificant and I need impact, I'm going to abuse you, because that's the only thing that has any impact. Every time I feel small, so it can become a vicious circle. In the vicious circle, if I do something good and it goes completely unacknowledged, like, oh yeah, fine, put it over there, and I really worked hard on that, so my feelings are hurt. And then I do something else to try and see, come on, I wanted to get appreciation here, and now I feel hurt. And then I say with a strong tone, gee, you're not being very nice today. And the person immediately focuses in because they're identifying as a victim. And so suddenly something that I've said has fit their box. So they immediately give full attention. It's like, oh, now I get some respect and some attention. That's what I was needing when I tried to do something good. You wouldn't give it to me. Now you're doing something good. And they're like, what do you mean? What do you mean? Well, maybe that was it. I just feel a little hurt. But I'm liking the attention because now I'm getting all the attention for doing this. So now maybe I turn it into a big diatribe. Well, you're not very nice about this. Oh, talk about that. And you're not very nice about this. Well, let's talk about that. Well, you're not very nice about this and this and this. Really? Well, you're getting all this attention, but pretty soon, because you're only getting attention when you talk about the negative, pretty soon you've found yourself into the box of the abuser that they're projecting on you. Because it is abusive to only talk about the negative, just as it is abusive to only hear the negative. So they're starting out feeling abused and that you're an abuser. So when you give something positive, and you gift, and then this other thing, it's like that's disturbing my image. Out of frustration, you flip to the other side, you get attention. That's what you wanted. You need impact in order to relate and regulate. So then you do more and more and more and more and more and more and more. And now you fit the projection. And now they can honestly say, before it was an induced projection, meaning they just projected in advance. But after treating you in this way, now they can honestly say, you only focus on the negative things about me. And the thing is, it can be done in reverse to you only focus on the negative things that I do. You see, that's how it flips together. You only focus on the negative things about me. Why? Because that's what gets attention, that's what gets validation, that's what gets your time, that's what gets your presence, and I want all that. You only say the negative things about me, because that's what gets my attention. That's when I honor you. That's when I show up. To defend myself or to agree with you, it doesn't matter, because impact is primary. First and foremost, at human beings, we want presence. We want impact so that we can regulate and find balance within ourselves so we can attune to another human being. You cannot do that when you don't exist. And so this projection, the identification box determines what exists. And the projection, the behavior, so you define this is what exists, and then for me to exist, I have to show up in that box. If I don't show up in that box, then I don't exist for you. I now have one of two choices. I can either disengage in the relationship and find someone else where I exist, or I can stay in a relationship and feel like I don't exist, or I can start treating you in the way that you react to and respond to. And this is one of the reasons why trauma becomes self-perpetuating. Trauma is the most intense reaction you can have. And when trauma is unresolved, you dissociate from reality that's happening day to day because you're busy remembering your trauma. The only person you show up for is the person who touches on the trauma trigger. And so there's a whole group of people who feel very insignificant, and because they've experienced that over and over again, who actively play a part in triggering intense emotion in people who can be triggered because they don't want to be invisible and feel like they don't matter. And so they focus on the thing that is most painful in the other so that they can exist. And until the person has healed the loop of trauma, in order to exist most powerfully, you have to show up as a reenactor of the trauma. Because the person who is trapped in trauma is not in the present moment. They're in the loop of the past trauma.